So this is a perfect action scene, right? Well, so is this. And yeah, so is this. And this one is pretty great too. But they all look and feel so different. They can't all be perfect, can they? Well, no, of course not, because there is no single way to direct action scenes that will always work perfectly. Action isn't directed by one common technique, but instead is dictated by a number of factors, from the emotion of the characters in the scene, the story around it, and even things like the fighting style used, and of course those performing the action. Jackie Chan preferred wider shots, less cutting, a more static camera. His films also generally were lighter in tone, and he made use of the environment probably more than any other action star, so the audience is given more time and space within each shot to gain an understanding of the objects around him before he makes use of them. In Oldboy, Park Chan-wook wanted to create a sort of anti-fight sequence, one that, above everything else, shows just how difficult this sort of thing is, how exhausting it would be. In addition, you have to believe that this guy would actually be capable of completing this arduous quest. By actually seeing what he can do, you never question his skills from this point on. That's why they use this long one-take sequence. The raid starts by showing us a guy who clearly, to a certain point, is skilled. He's a cop, he's a martial artist. We don't need a long take or something to show his skill, as the cinematic language so far has done its job well enough that we expect he's going to be pretty good at beating up bad guys. What we see instead is what he is fighting for. Already we don't want him to die. So when he's fighting, it's intense. It is close and brutally violent. The film doesn't shy away from close-ups and shakiness. It's almost anti-Jackie Chan in its stylings at times, but it works because technically we still hold the shot long enough to see what is happening. After all, over-editing is much more frustrating in my opinion than shaky cam. But also that the intensity is scary. We feel how close this guy is to death at all times. Silat 2 is a less showy style, a faster, closer, arguably more kinetic way of fighting than some other martial arts. Compare the movement in the raid, for example, to how Bruce Lee operates within the frame. Lee loved the surprise that came from a quick hit, the time spent waiting for a punch to be even thrown. Jeet Kune Do is also a very different form of martial art than Silat. Sitting out in wide allows for this kind of tension, but Evans instead has these long, drawn-out kinetic sequences that are less about showing the hero's talent and more just about how the hell will he survive. The whole film is filled with martial arts, but it's less about them. This isn't, for example, a showcase the way a film about a martial arts teacher is, and so you don't expect these simple, one-on-one, rather respectful fights you might see in Ip Man. But instead Evans has said he sees the raid as a sort of survival horror, and it shows. When the raid 2 widened the scope, expanding the scale of many of the fights, becoming more of a crime drama, the fights also change a little too. The fighting in the second film at times feels a part of some heightened reality, and it has a variety of approaches that, whilst true to the original, feel right for that broader reaching story. The car chase, for example, whilst as kinetic and brutal as the first film's melee and gun battle sequences, brings the bigger and better elements sequel strives for without losing sight of the sort of world these characters inhabit. When Evans wants a huge brawl, he keeps in mind the grim, gritty reality of the raid, and so sets it in pretty much the dirtiest location you can get. The only time you really bring in this sort of tone, the more grand cinematic feeling, is while someone is pretty brutally killed. They always remain true to what they are making, the action dictated by the story.
Even when there's a fight scene going on, it's to do with the plot. So like the fight scene continues the story going forward. Plot there's character there's motivation and everything else.
One of the key things about the action in the raid films is that Evans doesn't shoot for coverage. Much like Chan, who was still clearly an influence on his films, Evans doesn't work on a basis that he will find his sequences in the edit. He knows what point he would edit into and out of every shot, and doesn't complete a shot until he is happy with a take. The same with Chan and all action film experts. They shoot over and over until they are happy with what they have. That's what sets great action directors from the more director-for-hire types, or those who depend on second unit almost entirely. I don't like this idea now that every action film's fistfights have to be so quick and fast and every character is a martial arts expert. That's not always the way to go. You don't always have to cheat speed and skill through shaking the camera and editing quickly. You can simply go for more hard-hitting, realistic styles that are easier for a less martial arts experienced actor to do. Look at this scene from the recent trailer for the upcoming Atomic Blonde. Though Theron did train quite a bit for the role, the director doesn't push her skill too much. The action is slower and more deliberate than in The Raid, but it is still a great sequence. Compare this from Return of the Jedi to this from Revenge of the Sith. One is incredibly over-choreographed and the other simply emotionally charged, and I know which I prefer. If you don't have 100 days to shoot your action film, or the 8 days alone it takes to get a scene like this, then simplify it, don't cheat it. If you have strong characters, and a story your audience is invested in, then the emotion and narrative the action scene provides will be enough to make it exhilarating. If the stakes are high, the tension palpable and the actor's game, then that is all you need. So you can shoot it in a more traditional way. Plan your shots. Don't film from a dozen angles. Audiences will accept this much more readily than this. So there isn't really a perfect action scene, and there isn't really a perfect technical style of shooting action. But there is an optimal way of ensuring you will get the best action sequences, and that's to know what you want and to only move on from a take when you're happy with what you have. Compromise should happen before you get on set, not during the shoot and not during the edit. Set your limitations so that what you capture on set is going to be good, and you know what you're probably going to use. This is simple. This is complex. Both are fantastic. Perfect action direction isn't about how crazy you can make everything, it's about how you can make any action scene, big or small, slow or fast, as dramatic and exhilarating as possible while still in service of the rest of the film. You do that by knowing what the scene means to the characters and story, knowing your limitations and finding the right style to work in support of them, and not compromising once you have that. I quickly want to mention I've just launched a Patreon campaign where you can help support this channel. I love making these videos and really want to expand into bigger and more high quality content, and with you, I can take this to the next level. So please take a look at the rewards on the page and get involved if you can. Thanks.